All right, so back to O levels. Who would have thought? So I'll be doing October, November 2017, variant 2, which is R variant. Um, and I'll basically be trying to explain my thought process as I solve this paper as much as I can, at least. Okay, so one says that economists refer to factors of production. If you remember, factors of production used to include land, labor, capital, and obviously enterprise as well. Hopefully all of you have studied this. Anyways, and they're asking what is not a factor of production. So the fields of a farm classify as land, so that is a factor. The machinery is capital, so that is a factor. The staff in D, that is also labor, right? So that is a factor. The shares that a company holds, that doesn't really classify in either one of the four factors of production that we studied that I've outlined here, right? So through elimination and just through logic, you can take C. Two, the government allowed a building company to construct new houses which destroyed an area designated as an area of natural beauty. Which concepts can be applied to this statement? Budget surplus, public sector. Well, I don't see how budget surplus applies here, to be honest. External costs, opportunity costs. I can see how an external cost would apply here, because if you destroy an area that is designated as one of natural beauty, well, you are foregoing some external benefit. Like natural beauty used to have positive externalities, because even those who weren't necessarily involved in whatever economic transactions happening there still used to gain some level of satisfaction as they pass by. So if you destroy that, and if instead of natural beauty it's now just houses and so on, so there can be some degree of external cost. Opportunity cost is another interesting thing. So basically the cost of choosing one alternative over the other, and I believe even that can be linked here, because what are the two alternatives? You can either have new houses, or you could have natural beauty. You have to pick one over the other, and whatever you pick, you will obviously face a cost, face an opportunity cost. So if you pick houses, your opportunity cost is your natural beauty that you had to forego. If you pick natural beauty, it is the new houses that could have been constructed which you did not construct, so that is the opportunity cost. Based on that, I believe it is B. However, let's go to the rest of the options. Well, government subsidy really not referred to at all here. It has allowed a building company, it has not subsidized a building company. Remember, subsidies basically grants, loans, any transfer that the government makes to the producer in order to lower the producer's costs and encourage production. Private enterprise, again, okay, I can see how a building company might be a private and might be classified as private enterprise, but what on earth? The budget has nothing to do with this. The budget would be involved if you had something to do with tax revenue, with overall government expenditure. There's no government expenditure here. There's no tax revenue here, because your budget is basically your revenue minus your expenditure. In this case, this would be your tax revenue. That's what it mainly makes up, and this is your government expenditure. Excuse the bad handwriting, but none of that is involved here. So because of that, we'd stick with B. Elimination really helps in MCQs. Question 3, the diagram shows a PPC. The country is using all of its resources, so all of its resources, to produce both manufactured goods and services. Okay, so basically it's only producing manufactured goods and services, no other goods. That's what it's trying to say, and that can be shown by this PPC. What movement would represent an improvement of technology in manufacturing? So if there's an improvement of the technology in manufacturing, now understand one thing. So if you have technological advancements, if your technology goes up, that increases your potential, the output you could have potentially achieved. How do I explain this? So before, if you had been 100% efficient, if you put all of your resources together and you can produce, let's say, 100 units of both goods, then you have technological advancements, your even your potential increases. The idea here is, so now if you for the same number of inputs, you can just have more a greater potential output. So basically, the maximum output you could have gained before, that maximum potential output has increased. That's what technological advancements do. So here normally it's seen by a PPC, your outward shift. What we normally used to see, bad handwriting, okay, this was your PPC, let's say. An outward shift is normally associated with, improvement of technology. Now what they and the okay, so what we can say here, there is a slight twist in this question as well, is that while this would have been generally, this diagram that I've drawn would have been generally if technological advancements happen and your production processes become much more efficient and productive. Here it's only with regards to manufacturing goods. So the diagram that you make here is somewhat like this. If you have manufacturing goods here and services here, this was your PPC before. Your PPC for your potential for manufacturing goods has increased. So your PPC with regards to manufacturing goods should increase, but with regards to services, it should remain the same because services have not undergone any improvements in technology. So kind of like this, kind of like a pivoted shift. If I draw it here, somewhat like this, which clearly shows that M would be your final point, and this is just one option, N to M. But another way to look at this is, if you think about it, even if you did not think of this in the paper, if you have improvement in technology in your manufacturing sector, right, it should be easier for you to produce more of manufacturing goods. You would increase the production of manufacturing goods. However, the production of services would remain the same. So you just look at which 2 points which show the same amount of services but more amount of manufacturing goods. So if you look at this, the amount of services are the same. However, manufacturing goods, let's say, their output increased from M to M1, which is what you wanted to show, which is why you can go from N to M. What is the government most likely to produce in a mixed economy? So mixed economy is where you have some degree of the market mechanism of private enterprise and all allocating, and the government also allocating, and so that you have like the mixture of both, and they're asking you what is the government most likely to produce. Now these are little tricky questions because all of them could be correct. However, you have to pick the one that is again most likely to happen. The government is not likely to produce all the goods and services. Sorry, all of the services and none of the goods. I mean, that doesn't make any intuitive sense. It's the way things are split with regards to allocation has nothing to do with what are services and what are goods. The split I'm talking about, the split between the goods that are produced by the private sector and the goods that are produced by the public sector. So that doesn't make sense. Amount of goods and services equal to those of the private sector. Well, no one's sitting there keeping count if private sector has produced so many goods, so I'm going to produce so many goods. Like obviously not, right? This is definitely, C is definitely wrong, because no goods and services, the government has to produce something to be, for this particular economic system to be classified as a mixed economy. If the government is not producing anything, if it's playing no role in the allocative mechanism, then it really is a free market economy rather than a mixed economy. So perhaps the most sensible out of the lot was some of the goods and services. You can't necessarily quantify it as all of the services, let's say, or half of the goods and services like that. Those are just illogical options. So the sensible one is some of the goods and services. Which of the effects of economic development is an external cost? Again, so a cost that would be incurred to a third party, that is external to the economic exchange. Okay, so higher employment is not a cost, right? Higher fixed costs could be, but higher fixed, in fact, traffic congestion would be better. Um, anyhow, let's still go through them. So higher employment we crossed out because it's not a cost, it's a benefit. Higher fixed costs, uh, the effects of economic development. I don't, well, I don't necessarily see how economic development leads to higher fixed costs necessarily. It's a pretty big leap, to be honest. Um, I mean, I can understand why someone might get confused with this though, because like, uh, with regards to, I mean, if so let's say some development is leading to higher fixed costs of other industries, maybe that could be classified as an external cost. But the idea here is it's very difficult to intuitively think that economic development, that growth and so on, and a more stimulated economy would somehow lead to higher fixed costs. Fixed costs being the cost that a firm will pay even when it's producing, like say, zero output. So the rent you pay on your building, the interest you pay on the machinery you've leased out, all those are fixed costs. I don't see how economic development, how that has an effect of economic development. On those bases, I can cross it out because it has no direct link with economic development. It's not an effect of it. Increased production, well, how is that an external cost though? How is more production a cost? Not necessarily clear here. However, increased traffic congestion can definitely be linked because when you have a more stimulated economy, when you have development, when you have growth and so on, and because of development, you normally have greater employment, you have greater output and so on. Because of that, obviously, if you're producing more, then there's more raw materials being transported, there's more business activity that's going on. Um, there normally with development, there's a greater there are increases in consumer spending, so even your populace is more active. Because of that, it can definitely increase traffic congestion. Think of it like this way. uh, Economic development, well, here I'm using economic growth and development synonymously. They're not normally the same thing, but there's a huge overlap. So if you have more production, let's say in one particular area, let's say in Kurangi, instead of the amount of factories they have now, there was more growth, there is more development and so on, and because of that, they have 10 times the factories there. Think of it like that. An area which has now 10 times the factories there. Obviously, there will be more traffic, there will be traffic congestion. And if there's a poor guy who's just trying to get to, let's say, wherever he's trying to get to, but he's not really involved in any of the factories, not involved in all of that, he still has to suffer through the traffic. It's a cost to him, and he's external to that exchange. So that's why it's an external cost. Question 6. The table illustrates the demand and supply for coffee in a market in Africa. When the price, and you have this table, we'll look at that later. When the price rises from 20 to 30 per kg, what is the PED for coffee? Okay, so if you remember PED, what was the formula of PED? Let me write this in blue. It was a percentage change. Again, percentage or proportionate. You can't just take it in absolute values. Percentage change in quantity demanded to your percentage change in price. Now, to calculate PED, we need percentage change in quantity demanded and your percentage change in price. Now, what is the percentage change in price? We can calculate that. It goes from 20 to, let's say, 30. That would, I believe, off the top of my head, I believe that is what, 1.5. So 150%. I can say a 150% increase. You can calculate that mathematically as well. Like just do 30. If you want to calculate that mathematically, just do 30 minus 20 upon 20 into 100. I believe you'll get your value. You'll get your increase. This is in the increase, percentage increase you'll get, which is good because we want percentage change. The triangle represents change. But it's very clear. I mean, even if you don't want to use your calculator because you're lazy, if 20%, the 20% go 50% increase, if you have a 50% increase in, let's say, $20, then you get $30. So just calculate, just use the formula. In fact, don't use logic. Logic can let you down. Just be nice, use the formula. Okay. What was the percentage change? It was a positive 50%. An increase is denoted by a positive sign, right? Okay. So now we have to figure out what was the percentage change in quantity demanded. We went from 20, which had a quantity demanded of 40, to 30, which had a quantity demanded of 30. How do you calculate the percentage change in quantity demanded now? You go from 30, which is your final, minus initial, which is 40, upon initial into 100. If you quickly pop that into your calculator, what is that? Is that 25%? 30 minus 40 divided by 40 into 100. Yeah, that's a 25%. So that is minus 25%. The reason it's minus because it's decreasing. It's going from 40 to 30. Now, this should give me a PED value of what? 25 upon 50 is 0.5, right? Now it says minus 0.5. Now, if you remember, with PED, you can just ignore your sign because your sign will always be negative. Why is that? Because your price and quantity demanded have an inverse relationship. If price is increasing, as was the case here, quantity demanded would always be decreasing or not changing at all. But the idea here is you'll always have a negative sign. So with PED values, like we used to say, if it's greater than 1, it's elastic. Technically, we're saying it's greater than 1, ignoring the minus sign. So we're talking about the magnitude there because we just ignore the minus sign in most PUD calculations. So here you can as you can see, none of the options have a minus sign because you can simply ignore it. So you'll get B through such calculations. Hopefully that's clear. 7. It was reported that the supply of oil would be affected by the growth of new oil fields and demand would be affected by rapid global economic growth. If point X is initial equilibrium, this is point X, which point could represent the new equilibrium? Now, what's happened here? That the supply of oil is going to be affected. Let's change back to red because I like that color. By the discovery of new oil fields. If you have new oil fields, like there are more oil fields now, think of it like that. If you have more oil fields, obviously you can produce more. So you know the supply of oil will be affected by the discovery of new oil fields, and because there are more oil fields, supply would increase, right? And demand would be affected by rapid economic growth. What do you need for growth? Think of growth. You have greater employment, greater output, more production, more business activity going on. What does all of this need? Especially production and growth in the manufacturing sector, right? It needs a very important factor input. It needs a very important raw material, that is oil. If my manufacturing sector, if my steel industry is now producing a lot more, if any industry is producing a lot more, just for transport, it's going to need more oil, which means it's going to demand more oil, right? So if you have economic growth, you have more production. There's a greater demand for raw materials, especially for transportation, and hence there's a greater demand for oil. Now remember, your supply increases to the right, your demand also increases to the right. So supply increases to the right would mean you move here as supply increases from S to S3. Then demand would also increase to the right, so you go from D to D3, you move here, you get C. What is likely to decrease the level? Okay, so to decrease the level of saving in an economy, an increase in the general level of income? No. If everyone's richer, well then yes, what happens? What is your disposable income? The income that you can, your after tax income. So after your direct taxes, after income tax has been applied. What can you do with your disposable income? You can either save or you can spend. Some people would say invest in shares and all, but as you will hopefully learn later on, that's still called saving. What we call investment in our daily life is different to what economic theory calls investment. So as for households, you can't invest, you can only save, you can only spend. Think of it like that. I don't want to go too deep into the nitty-gritties of it. So if your disposable income increases, most likely your spending will increase, but your saving will also increase. I mean, you'll spend more, you'll save more, you have more money. So increase in general level of income would mean more saving, not less. an increase in the number of cheap offers in shops. Okay, now maybe this is right, in fact, because if there are more cheap offers, what does this stuff do? Like, what do discounts and offers and cheap offers in shops do? They encourage spending, right? That's what they're trying to do. That's what Pizza Hut is trying to do when it gives you whatever discount it has for Ramzan. Uh, so if you're encouraging spending, you have a fixed amount of disposable income. So yeah, so you can spend a bit, you can save a bit, but if spending goes up, let's say spending here goes up, then saving has to go down, assuming your disposable income is fixed, which it is in this case because, well, they haven't told us the disposable income is changing. So if the number of cheap offers have increased, you are more likely to, fall for that stuff. You're more likely to go out and start to spend a lot more and buy more burgers and get that, buy one get one free stuff. If you're spending more, you're obviously going to be saving less because you have the same amount of money. You can instead of saving, you spent that money. Not the best of ideas, but that's what you did. Because of that, it is likely that you would have decreased the level of saving in an economy. Obviously, this would have to be rather widespread. I mean, cheap offers would have to be available in all shops in the economy, but that's just the way they phrased the question. So that's fine. Let's look at the other options anyways. C is a redistribution of income from the poor to the rich households. Okay, so you're rich, they normally save more. Or they save a greater proportion of their income. Now, I'm sure you're thinking, no, the rich, they throw their money around like anything. I mean, yes, they do, but that's because they have so much money. But if you look proportionately, generally, the rich save more. They put a lot more money saving. They get shares. They put it into banks, stuff of that sort. They throw a lot of their money as well. But like if the poor had been consuming, let's say 80% of their income, the rich will be consume 60% of their income, which means that if the poor had been saving 20% of their income, the rich would save 40% of their income. And the reason for that is because the poor have so less, they have such a small amount of money that just to fulfill their basic necessities, their basic needs, it kind of like uses all of it. So they can't really save much because they don't have anything to save. Like if you have just 100 rupees a day coming in, 50 rupees a day coming in, I mean, you can't save anything from that. You need that amount of money just to meet your basic day-to-day needs. Because of that, the poor really don't save that much, but the rich save a lot. So if income is going from poor to rich, it's going from poor people who don't save that much to rich people who save a lot. Hence, overall saving would increase. And since we were asking for decrease in this question, that is not a legitimate answer. This is obviously wrong. So if rise in interest rates always encourages saving. Why is that? Because obviously, if instead of like let's say a 2% return that Faisal Bank is giving you on your savings account, if you're now getting a 5% return, it makes more sense to save rather than spend because you're getting more money from saving. So if interest rate increases, what we can say is the opportunity cost of spending increases. Or to put it simply, it's just more beneficial for you to save. You're getting a greater interest on it, which is why you would save more. Which is why, since they're asking for a decrease here, that's not a proper. That's not the correct option. So it would be B. Which change will make a manufacturing company replace machines with labor? Oh, sorry, what? Okay, so there's a manufacturing company and there are machines and they're replacing machines with labor. So they're getting rid of machines, they're saying yes to labor. That's funny. To maintain the most efficient combination of factors of production. But when we talk about the most efficient combination of factors of production, so we're basically saying that the factor of production that gets you the job done within the least cost, basically. So you're going to be looking at two things. You either look at productivity If productivity is greater, obviously you want more of that factor, and you're looking at the price of the factor. If price is lower, obviously you want more of that factor. Those are the two metrics that you look at. So with machines, price is normally the interest you pay when you lease the machines. With labor, it's the wages you pay to them. Okay, now you want to see what change will replace machines with labor. What change is favorable towards labor? The price of the product manufactured has increased. Doesn't have necessarily answer our question. If the price of the product manufactured increases, normally that means more profit for the producer because the price has increased, right? Assuming people still continue to buy it. Even if it means more profit for the producer, there's no indication here to say that it will replace machines with labor. He may hire both more of machines and labor, but it has no indication to say that it will replace machines with labor. So it's really an irrelevant option here. This should be good. The productivity of labor has increased, as I already outlined here. If the productivity of labor of something increases, then obviously you would want more of that. You'd be like, yes, labor is pretty productive. I want more of labor. If you're hiring more of labor, you're probably going to be cutting back. You're probably going to be downsizing the amount of machinery you have, and because of that, you can say B is the correct option. The productivity of machinery has increased. No, because if the productivity of machinery increases, you would employ more machinery. If you're employing more machinery, then you're employing less labor. So you're not replacing machines with labor. That's what they want, right? They want you to replace machines with labor. So not C. If the wages of labor has increased, you would again employ less of labor, because obviously if wages of labor have increased, it's just more expensive for you. You wouldn't want that anymore. You're like, isko chodo, like just let's go with machines. But that's not what they want in the question. They want you to go towards labor. So that's that. Okay, question 10. Although there are higher paid jobs in offices, many workers stay in low paid jobs on farms. What might explain this in developing economies? It's because they want to eat organic all their life. Agricultural workers lack the necessary education and skills. Yeah, I mean, pretty much, to be honest. Like, why doesn't your farmer go and work as a CEO of Pepsi? Or okay, a more realistic example. Why doesn't your farmer go and start working in an IT company? Even though the IT company is hiring and has vacancies. Because the IT company is not going to take him, right? Because he doesn't have education, he doesn't have the skill level. He's just stuck in that cycle of poverty. So that's why your poor farmer just sticks to your low paid jobs. Pretty much answers your question. And I don't know, I would go through the rest of the three options, but they look like really silly ones. So like here, you just look at the correct one and you should be fine. So if it wasn't obvious already, I am solving this paper on spot. So like, this is the first time I'm seeing this paper. I didn't solve it before the video, although that because I'm kind of lazy. So because I don't want to misquote anything, I do check my answers at regular intervals. So I just checked the first 10 questions. We're good with them. So far, we've marked all the answers correctly. And now let's proceed with the next lot. Okay, the diagram has two curves. Well, yes. One is the demand for labor, another is the supply of labor. Why is my stylus messing up? Anyhow, government. Okay, and should be kind of obvious. I mean, I'm not going to go into the nitty-gritties of explaining why the demand for labor is downward sloping, why the supply for labor curve is upward sloping. You should have studied this. And like, it's a very common thing. Like demand curves for pretty much everything, like a downward sloping, supply curves are like upward sloping. So even if you don't remember whether the demand curve for labor was downward sloping or not, it's a pretty safe bet to just to go with the regular trend that you saw in even product markets. That trend would also apply to factor markets like the labor market. Anyhow, So you label this, a government fixes a minimum wage that must be paid by employers. Uh, okay. So let me explain what I just did. Now, what is a minimum wage? Now, a minimum wage does not mean, usually the connotation that you should think with a minimum wage, it means more wage. That's normally the effect that happens. Why? Because the minimum wage is not something that is meant to restrict wage. It's not something that is meant to limit wage. That's your maximum wage. Although I don't think people impose that here. But this is basically a wage floor. That is, no, it wages cannot fall below that. They can only be above that. So in this case, wages can't be below this. It can only be above this. Any wage above this is fine, but you cannot legally pay anyone, any employee, a wage less than this. Like, so, and obviously you can see the examples of minimum wage, all around you. Maybe not in this country, but like generally, right? So why am I saying that in this case it will have no change on market equilibrium? Because understand, what happens when the government does not fix the minimum wage? In this particular market, you have wage W and quantity Q of labor. That is where the market allocates. It allocates by itself. This is even when, let's say, the government has not put the minimum wage. What then happens when the government does put the minimum wage? It says, guys, everyone has to pay above this. But in this diagram, in this particular market at least, you're already paying above this. So will it have any change? No. I mean, it would have changed if you place it above equilibrium, because then the wage rate would have to change. It would have to go up. But you're saying it's like I'm already paying everyone $10 an hour, and you're saying no, you have to pay more than $5 an hour. Well, yeah, I'm already doing that. It will have no change on my market equilibrium. So because of that, it would have no change on market equilibrium. What is an internal diseconomy of scale? So diseconomy of scales are those that increase average costs of production, as opposed to your economies of scale that used to decrease average cost of production. A nice way to look at this is via this diagram. So you have costs here. You have, let's say, output here. So as you increase output, your costs fall till your optimum point. So this is your point of economies of scale. What just happened? Okay. However, if output increases beyond a certain amount, perhaps due to communication issues, managerial issues, or because workers can feel alienated or less productive in large companies. Because of stuff of that sort, you then have diseconomies of scale. And there are diseconomies of scale because with increase in output, you have increase in cost, basically. In average cost, to be more appropriate. Economies of scale was where increase in output used to decrease cost. Anyhow, so what is an internal economy of scale? By internal, it means it's like internal to the firm. The cause of it is internal to the firm. It's not something that is going to be outside. Okay, so a lack of communication in a firm, in fact, that's pretty much the answer. Because as your firm becomes bigger, it's more difficult to communicate, to remain coordinated. So you have to spend on stuff like communication and so on, and then there are breakdowns in communications. And perhaps you underestimate the importance of this, but when you get a huge firm, coordination is very, very important. And just to ensure you coordinate effectively is very difficult. So as output increases, by output, you can also take this synonymous to size. Obviously, a larger firm has larger output. So as you become larger, you may face benefits like economies of scale, like bulk buying and so on. But after a certain point, you become so large that you have issues like lack of communication. So that's your answer. A reduction in cost by bulk buying is an example of economies of scale, not diseconomies. A shortage of skilled labor in an area, traffic congestion in a particular area. Now, these are both things that increase average cost. If there's a shortage of skilled labor, obviously, if the supply of labor decreases, you have to pay each and every worker more then. And obviously, it's just a pain, right? I mean, you want enough labor there. Shortage just doesn't help you. If there's traffic congestion, then stuff like transportation costs go up, which also add to your costs. So both of these are examples of diseconomies of scale. Why are they not our answer? Because they're examples of external diseconomies of scale. Because the reason why these two things exist is not just internal to the firm. It is external. So shortage of skilled labor means generally the industry has grown so much. There isn't just one large firm. There are a lot of largest firms that are all buying that labor. Traffic congestion is like if in one particular area a lot of industries grow, if a lot of factories set up, then you have traffic congestion. So the cause of it is not just limited to the firm. If it's not just limited to the firm, you can't call it an internal diseconomy. This would be classified as an external diseconomy of scale. Communication, however, on the other hand, is just internal to the firm, which is why that's your answer. What distinguishes a multinational company from other types of companies? So what is an MNC, your multinational corporation? The idea here is, well, be a little clear here. Don't just think of a multinational that has products available in multiple countries. Don't just think of it as some company that sells in a lot of countries. It's a lot more than that. Anyone can export to other countries. Multinational corporations produce and obviously and sell in more than one country. So if you take the example of Unilever, it doesn't just export to Pakistan, it comes here and freaking produces in Pakistan. That's why you can call it a multinational. So it exports its products isn't specific enough. Anyone can export its products. Anyone can import its raw materials. It produces outside its country of origin. Yes, that would be correct. Just to add to one thing I said over here is multinational corporations produce and sell in more than one country. However, they have their headquarters in a specific country. So there would still be a country of origin, a specific country where where it mainly originated from, where it has its headquarters, let's say. So anyhow, so it produces outside its country of origin basically indicates that, okay, it might be producing in its country of origin, but there are other countries in which it produces as well, outside of the original country, right? Which is why it is the correct answer is C. It promotes its products in trade fairs abroad. I mean, like, anyone can promote your products, man. Like, that doesn't make you multinational. 14. A major computer company announced that its profits had fallen below the level predicted. Okay, so why would it have less profits? Profits are basically your revenue minus costs. Remember that. What might have caused this? Increased advertising costs that greatly improve sales? No. Why? Because you might say, okay, costs have increased. If costs have increased, profits should go down. But that greatly improves sales. If it greatly improves sales, then your revenue has also increased, kind of nullifying the effect of increased costs. So that's not your correct option. Low prices that made the company's product competitive. Now, you might say that if prices are low, revenue would fall. Revenue, just by the way, total revenue is price into quantity. You may say if prices are, let's say, low, then total revenue should decrease. However, if it does make the company's product more competitive, a more competitive product sells more. Ergo, the quantity increases. If the quantity increases because the product is more competitive, even if the price has decreased, if the quantity has increased, then your total revenue, you can't really say that the total revenue has fallen or something. If the total revenue hasn't fallen, you can't really say that the profits have fallen, which is why this isn't an option. New technology has reduced costs. If you have a new technology that reduces costs, you should have greater profits, not less profits. Reduced sales, which means revenue has down, and low prices, which also means revenue has down. It has gone down. This is your option. What was revenue? Look at it here again. Look at it here. Price and quantity. Reduced sales means quantity is down. Sales, volume, quantity, same thing. Reduced prices or low prices means prices are down. If both of these things decrease, then obviously your total revenue is going to go down. If your total revenue goes down, then look at this equation. The profit is revenue minus cost. If revenue goes down and we don't know any change in cost, then obviously your profit will decrease. And that's why it's answer D. The table shows the variable costs of a firm. It can sell the units for $5 each. Its fixed costs are $10, which are basically, when no output is being produced. That's the idea. When no output is being produced, that this is an O. Okay. And it can sell the units for $5 each. That is basically your price. How many units will the firm produce to maximize profits? Okay. Now, the idea here is that have you studied this in O levels? That's interesting. So, quantity produced is this. Variable cost is. You also have you have your quantity that you have your variable cost that you can also that you have the variable cost of selling that many, of producing that many units. Sorry. So before we go on further, let's just think of the total revenue. Let's make another column of the total revenue you would gain by selling that many units. So here it would be 50. Why? Because total revenue, as I just said, is price into quantity, and it can sell the units for $5 each, which is basically the price, the amount you can sell for per unit, right? So if it's producing 10 and it can sell each for $5, that means it's taking in $50. Here it would be 55, 60. What is this? 65. Right? Okay. And this is the variable cost. What is maximizing profits? Profit is again revenue minus cost. You want this difference to be the greatest difference. If you have the greatest difference in revenue and cost, only then would you be maximizing profits. Now, pro tip: you don't need to look at fixed costs. Like just don't even look at them. Why? Because fixed costs are the same across all, right? In fact, you might want to just look at the difference between revenue and variable costs. But I suppose, wait, in fact, my apologies. It happens. In fact, do look at fixed costs. My bad. Theoretically, you should look at fixed costs, but for this, that was A2 stuff. My bad. Look at total costs. Look at total revenue, and then figure out where total costs and total revenue have the greatest difference. So let's in fact make a table for total costs. Total costs are what? Your fixed costs plus your variable costs. Variable costs are 20, fixed costs are a constant of 30. Fixed costs do not change with change in output. So this is fixed costs are a constant of 10, sorry. So this is 30, 40, 50, 60. These are your total costs, right? Because it's your variable cost plus your fixed costs. Now you have to do what you have to do. You have to look at this, 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 and figure out for which particular quantity you have the greatest difference. So with 10, you have 20 difference. With 11 units, you have 15 difference. With 12, you just have a 10 difference. With 13, you just have a 5 difference. So obviously, profit maximizing output would be units 10, because you have total revenue of 50 and total cost of 30, giving you a profit of 20, which is the maximum we can see across these 4 options. Hopefully that made sense. What, when increased, will help a government to reduce the rate of inflation? So inflation is increase in prices. You want to control this. You want to lower the rate of inflation. some amount. So if they're increasing by, let's say, 5%, you want to control this, let's say make it 3%, 1%, maybe even negative. Just try to reduce the increase in price level. Okay. When increased, if you increase your budget deficit, that is expansionary. No, astaghfirullah. um I mean, this is just so wrong. I mean, like, I don't know. So what is your budget? Budget is basically your total revenue. In a way, in fact, look at this as tax revenue. That's a better way to look at it from the government's perspective, minus your governmental expenditure. What happens if you are budgeting for a deficit? If you're budgeting for a deficit, if you're budgeting for a deficit, then government expenditure, government spending is greater than total revenue, which means, or rather tax revenue, which means government expenditure is great, it's high. If your expenditure is high, if you remember, AD was C plus I plus X, C plus I plus G plus X minus M. I can't remember if I studied this in O levels. Maybe I did. But the idea here is if government expenditure increases, aggregate demand increases, price level increases, and hence you get more inflation. You don't get less of it. Another way to look at this is if the government is just putting, if it's spending inside the economy, if it's really, if wherever you have spending, you normally push up prices because there is more demand for stuff then. So the government is spending inside the economy. Obviously, it will stimulate the economy more. It will push up prices because the government is obviously going to be demanding stuff like raw materials for its investment projects, infrastructure projects. It's going to be employing people, giving them wages. They will spend more, so they will push up prices because there will be greater demand because they can now spend. So you can think of it like that. Same logic with consumer spending. Consumer spending increases inflation because people are spending more. There's more demand. There are going to be higher prices. Okay. If you increase income tax, this should be your answer. Because if you increase income tax, your disposable income decreases, hence your consumer spending decreases. If consumer spending decreases, if people are spending less, there is less demand. Aggregate demand would be a better way to put it, but to put it simply, there is less people demanding goods and services. Then obviously there'll be your prices won't increase at the same rate because prices increase rapidly when people start to demand goods and services like crazy, when they start to spend like crazy. You're spending less, the increase in prices should slow down, to say the least. Pensions, no, because think of pensions like income, right? If you're increasing pensions, you're kind of like saying increasing income of the people, of the pensioners, right? If you're increasing income of the pensioners, they will consume more. If they're consuming more, then aggregate demand increases, then price level increases, inflation happens more, not less. Okay, so that is that. Let's proceed. The government introduces a new tax. It adds $1 to the price of every $10 goods and $2. Let's use blue, in fact, and $2 to the price of every $20 goods. Okay. What can be concluded about the nature of this tax? Is it a direct tax? No. Why is it not? Because direct taxes are taxes that are applicable on your income, like income tax. Indirect taxes, on the other hand, are taxes that what do you say, that apply on goods and services. So when you consume goods and services, so stuff like your general sales tax, your GST, basically your VAT, all of that type of stuff. So when you go to a restaurant and they say, okay, this much tax, that's your indirect tax. So it is not a direct tax. And well, if you kind of made this deduction, you'd obviously know that it is not a specific tax. Why is it not a specific tax? A specific tax is something that is, how do I say this? So it's a constant per unit tax on, on any amount of units. Let's say that. So let's say, um, how do I say this? Like, no matter how many units I buy, no matter what product I'm buying, perhaps I should include that in my definition as well. There's just going to be a constant per unit tax. So like, if I am buying, let's say, 50 units of whatever of good A, for example, the price of good A per unit would, instead of going like $10, it would go up $1. Like, it would be a constant amount that it's going to be increasing by. Here it's a little different, because here if you have a $10 good, then it's increasing by $1. If you have a $2 good, it is increasing by 20. If you have a $20 good, sorry, then it is increasing by $2. So in fact, if I could add to the definition, so for any amount of units, and like any and any price. So if they're charging different per unit taxes for different prices, then it isn't a specific tax. If anything, you could call it an ad valorem tax. I don't know if you studied that, but where it's a particular percentage of the price level. So let's say here, this case could be an ad valorem tax, because here it's like saying the tax would be 10% of the price level. 10% of a $10 good is 1. 10% of a $20 good is 2. So this is literally the textbook definition of an ad valorem tax, which is a percentage rather than a fixed specific amount. A specific amount would be, if it's a $10 good, it's still $1. If it's a $20 good, it's still $1. If it's a $100 good, it's still $1. That is a specific tax. It is a progressive tax. What is a progressive tax? In fact, so think of it like this. Now this is interesting. So normally a progressive tax is that if you're at a higher income level, you pay more of the tax. So that is true for like direct taxes, like income tax, where lower income level individuals have to pay less, but the percentage increases if you go to on a higher income level. Now you might be tempted to say that this is a progressive tax because, well, with more pricey goods, you have a greater amount of tax. However, as you should know, if it is a indirect, if as the general rule applies, direct taxes. So direct taxes are what do you call them? Are progressive. Indirect taxes are regressive, which means like they affect the poor more. So they affect let's say the rich more, they affect the poor more. Obviously there are explanations for all of this type of stuff, but like I don't want to go into the nitty-gritties in a past paper video. Just remember direct, progressive, indirect, regressive. So it is not a progressive tax, which should give you A. 18. The graph shows the percentage of income, so your proportion of income paid in taxation. Which line represents a proportional tax? What is a proportional tax? That if your income increases, the amount of tax you pay increases. And which is why a lot of people might make the mistake of picking either B or C. But then you haven't read the question correctly. The question talks about the percentage of income paid. Now, if your income is increasing and hence the tax you're paying is increasing, then that means that the percentage tax, the percentage of income you're paying to tax is the same. That's the idea. That if, let's say, my income increases by 10%, the tax I should pay compared to my previous levels will increase by 10%. That is not the case of a progressive tax. In a progressive tax, your income increases by a particular percentage. Your tax you pay increases by a lot more. Income increased by 50%. The tax I pay now is increasing by 60%, let's say, as compared to the previous level of tax I used to pay. So think of it like that. So hence, for a proportional tax, you will well, like, think of it like this: for a proportional tax, you always pay constant proportion of income. The proportion, the percentage is the same, which is why it's D. Because as D shows that the percentage of income paid is the same for any amount of income. It could increase, but the percentage you are paying in tax remains the same. A worker earns 40,000 a year and pays 20% income tax. Okay. He spends 5,000 on electrical goods and 10,000 on a car and pays 20% sales tax on each. How much indirect tax does he pay? So the income tax he's paying is direct tax. It is not included in our calculations. Now, to calculate the indirect tax he's paying, the calculation is very simple. The question says that he pays 20% sales tax on both of these products, right? So if you calculate, that's 20% is 20 upon 100 into the price of one, which is 5,000. That is the tax he paid on electrical goods, plus 20 upon 100 into 10,000. You know what he pays for his car. So car ka 20% kya hona chahiye? What should that be? And what should it be for electrical goods? So 2,100 is into 5,000 is 1,000. So here the tax he's paid, indirect tax, is 1,000 for this, and for your $10,000 car, nice and pricey, it's 2,000 for this. You add the two, you get 3,000. You get A. I mean, an alternative calculation is just you just sum them up. You sum up the total amount he's paid for both, and then you just take 20% on that. So that would be 20% of 15,000. Like, so whatever makes sense to you, just do that. Why is the HDI often considered to be better than the GDP per head as a measure of living standards? Let me tell you a bit about the HDI. What does the HDI look? The HDI looks at a lot of three major things, as far as I remember. So it was revised in 2010. So, but mainly the metrics it looks at are still the same. The revision mainly just made things a little more comprehensive, but it just worked on existing metrics rather than adding new metrics. So it doesn't matter which, when you studied it. The metrics are still, the basic metrics are still the same. So first, it's going to be looking at your GDP per head. HDI does look at GDP per head, but the beauty about the HDI is that it's a lot more than GDP per head. It looks at other stuff as well. So life expectancy, and the third major metric is literacy rate. Plus average years of schooling. I believe in 2010 they revised it to include average years of schooling as well as expected years of schooling. But like I said, such revisions don't really affect you giving your O-level exam. Anyhow, so why is the HDI better as a measure of standards of living standards? Because GDP per head excludes economic growth? No. GDP per head is in fact what is kind of like your basic definition for actual economic growth. So when you see growth rates, Chinese growth rates being publicized on the television, what are they talking about? They're talking about GDP per head. They're talking about increases in GDP per head. That's what they're saying when they're saying China's achieving 10% growth. That's what they're talking about. So obviously it can't exclude it. It's what GDP per head is growth, basically. Growth rates. GDP per head ignores population growth. That is false. If I just said GDP, maybe yes, then it doesn't take into account how your population is growing. But GDP per head, by definition, is GDP upon population per head, right? So it does not ignore it. This is an incorrect justification. HDI includes more than the production of goods and services, basically. It's just more than what's GDP? GDP is the monetary value of the goods and services produced within your economy in an year, to put it very simply. HDI is just a lot more than that. That's the beauty. HDI is calculated by the national government. Well, isn't I believe HDI is calculated by the UN, just to put it out there. But even if it was calculated by the national government, who on earth calculates GDP, right? It's not like some alien. It's not aliens don't come and calculate it, right? Which is why C will be your answer. In fact, let me just quickly check these 10 MCQs. Okay, so um, the MCQs we did from 10 to 20, they were fine. I just checked them. So far we've marked all MCQs correctly. Or rather, well, I say we've, but it's just me here, unfortunately. Question 21. A finance minister reported that the economy was experiencing inflation and economic growth. And by the way, just throwing it out there, if you're kind of tired and thinking of quitting, I would recommend you watch the last 10 questions. Those 10 are normally your trickier ones. They're the macro ones. Anyways, so the economy is experiencing inflation and economic growth, right? What would be evidence that both of these had occurred? Okay, so economic growth, for growth, you're kind of looking at, either, let's say, output has increased, either employment has increased, stuff of that sort. Inflation is very simple. You have to look at an increase in price level. You can't look at inflation any other way. So increased exports and increased output varies price level. Increased imports and increased income tax, but varies price level. Increased interest rates and increased net migration, but varies price level. Increased prices, yes, hence inflation is being there. Increased employment, hence economic growth is there. You got that. All right, so 22, the diagrams show percentage employment in different sectors in the two countries. Now the key here is percentage, at least I think. Okay, so you have country X, country Y, and they've shown you the percentage employed in different sectors, and which statement is correct when comparing X and Y. X employs more workers in the secondary industry than Y. Now you see, the reason this statement is problematic is because it says employs more workers. It talks about a particular quantity, that this is applying more amount than the other amount. When you have been given percentages and you don't know the total amount, let's say the total labor force, then you have no way of finding out who employs more workers. Let me give you an example. They're talking about the secondary industry, right? Let's take that example. Let's say that country X, the total amount of workers here is 100, and in country Y, the total amount of workers here was 1,000. So in country X, this is like around, I don't know, 35. So in the secondary sector, there will be 35 workers. Let me write this correctly. There will be 35 workers. In the secondary sector here, this is around 20. There would be what? 200 workers. So if you think about it, here this was a 35% bar chart. Here it's just 20%. You might think no, percentage is greater in X, but maybe Y employs more workers because it just had a larger labor force to begin with. So even a smaller percentage of a larger workforce or a larger labor force can result in more workers. Because of that, if you do not know the total labor force, which you don't over here, you're only given percentages. You can compare percentages, you can't compare absolute quantities. So you can't say this country employs more workers than this. You don't know how many workers, you just know the percentage. So A is wrong. Country X produces more primary output than Y. Well, kind of like the same issue more primary output. This is problem. This has two issues. Firstly, just because country X has like 50% workers in primary and country Y has 10% workers in primary, you still don't know who has more workers because you don't know the total labor force. So you just have no idea of figuring out who has more workers. But even if you could figure out who has more workers do not always equate to more output. Then productivity and tech and the type of capital and machinery they're using, stuff like that comes in the way. So X is wrong because of those two reasons that I provided. Country Y is more developed than country X, and perhaps if you look at D, yeah, perhaps this is the correct answer. Why is that? Because normally developed countries, they have a greater proportion in your tertiary, that is your services, and maybe not that much in secondary, but the idea is they've moved from primary to secondary and mainly from primary to tertiary, that is your service sector. So if half of your population is still in the primary sector and still in farming and stuff of that sort, coal mining, then you're not really that developed. But if a high amount of your population, 70% of your population, of your workforce rather, is in the service sector, well, that does show that you are developed, or at least relatively more developed than X, because instead of being involved in jobs like farming and so on, you're involved in banking, healthcare, stuff of that sort. To generally look at a larger proportion employed in the tertiary sector does indicate a higher degree, a higher amount of development, which is why we can say it's C. Country Y produces more secondary output, kind of the same issue that we saw in part B here. More output, you can't tell simply by looking at percentages. 23. What would be a cause? So what's a cause of cost push inflationary pressures? Now, what is cost push inflation? Inflation that comes about if you have your aggregate demand and let's say your aggregate supply. If aggregate supply decreases to the left, because of that, as you can see, this is your price level, this is your let's say GDP. Your price level increases. If your price level increases, then obviously you have inflationary pressures. Inflation is coming. Stuff is getting more expensive. So the idea here is you have to think, what will cause a decrease in aggregate supply? What will be such that it makes producers, it discourages producers to produce, or it makes it more difficult to produce, or it increases the cost of production, which also makes it more difficult to produce. Stuff of that sort. So what would be a cause of cost push inflationary pressure in an industry which supplies mobile cell phones? An increase in advertising in expenses for mobile phones? Maybe, because if you're advertising more, if that's an expense, right? Anything that increases your cost would decrease aggregate supply. So, but let's keep this on a hold for now. Let's look at the rest of the options. B, an increase in export duties on mobile phones. Now, export duties, if you increase export duties, it becomes more difficult for you to export, which might again decrease your overall supply. But supply in the local market, in fact, would just increase. Because if you think about this, if it is more difficult for you to export, there's a greater chance that you're going to start that a lot more output is left for your domestic market, because you're not exporting it. You're not sending it abroad, because then there's a duty on that. Normally we study about import duties. Export duties are not as frequently seen, but they've given it in the question. But this is also interesting. Let me, because I am solving on spot, so let me just read the other options as well. C is an increase in income taxes on the wages of employees. Well, that shouldn't really matter to us, because we're paying them the same wage, and on that wage the government can put whatever income tax. Doesn't really have a direct link. You can make a link in this question in this option as well, but not a direct link. Okay. an increase in the world demand for mobile phones. If the world demand for mobile phones increases, well, that could have inflationary pressures, but it wouldn't have cost push inflationary pressures that are linked to aggregate supply. So demand conditions won't really affect your aggregate supply conditions. So not that. Okay, but so let's look at the two options we had shortlisted. So one we had said is an increase in advertising expenses for mobile phones, and one we had said is an increase in export duties on mobile phones. Uh, and in fact, if I had to go with one, I'd go with well, I think I'd go with A, because if advertising expenses are greater, then your costs are greater, and costs, or if costs of a firm are greater, then on a micro level, if you think about it, supply goes down. When this happens on a more macro level, if it happens industry wide, then aggregate supply goes down. If aggregate supply goes down, it shifts to the left, which increases price. But because I'm not because I don't know, this question for some strange reason gave me a little issue, so let me just quickly check the marking scheme whether I'm right. 23 area, so we're fine. I know O levels, yay. Okay, so just to review what I said, increase in advertising expenses, it's an expense, right? If it's a cost that is being incurred to you as a firm, for a firm, if costs go up, if costs of production go up, which include costs related to promoting your products like advertising, if costs go up, we have studied this on a micro level, costs in factors affecting supply, if costs go up, supply goes down. Hence, if this happens on a more macro level, if costs of all of these firms go up, then aggregate supply goes down. Aggregate supply goes down, then you look at the diagram I drew here, aggregate supply shifts to the left, price level increases. The reason why you can't say B, the reason why B is wrong, C and D would obviously be wrong, is because if export duties are increasing, I can understand maybe the cost of exporting is increasing, but the cost of producing into the local market is unchanged. So we can't necessarily say that aggregate supply, which is really linked to the supply in the local market, that won't have any effect. If anything, the aggregate supply in the local market might increase, because if you can't export that easily, you're likely to keep a greater proportion of your output inside the local market. So if anything, in aggregate supply might increase in B rather than decreasing, which is why it's A. What is most likely to cause an increase in the population growth of a developing country? So what is likely to population, what is likely to increase the growth of your population? So what is likely to put it simply, what is likely to increase your population? A decrease in immigration? No. Think of it this way, in case you have difficulty understanding immigration and emigration and immigration. So emigration is when people go out. Think of this as like export migration. Immigration, if it isn't already obvious, is when people come in. Think of it like as import migration. So obviously, if there's a decrease in immigration, if fewer people are coming into your country, and these are not tourists, by the way, these are people who actually come and reside here, then obviously it won't increase your population, it will decrease your population. Population growth, sorry, not population. But like obviously, if fewer people are coming in, then your population would not increase at the same rate. A decrease in the birth rate? No. You need to be making more babies in order to have higher population growth. A decrease in the death rate? Yes, probably. In fact, yes, definitely. Because if there are less people dying, then obviously your population will increase. Because let's say this is your population, right? People are throwing babies inside the population, and what goes out of the population are people dying. But if fewer people are dying, let's say not as many people are dying, but babies are still being born, hence your population will increase. Your population growth will increase as well. So that's the idea. So decrease in death rate would be your answer. D is kind of like irrelevant. A decrease in the standard of living, it's difficult to make a direct link from it. You can make indirect links, but maybe even if you make an indirect link in this case, what happens when there's a decrease in standard of living? A very important metric to judge standard of living is life expectancy, is access to healthcare. When your standard of living goes down, you have less access to healthcare, your life expectancy goes down, you are more likely to die. Like it's easier to die to put it very simply. Your life expectancy goes down, your death rate will go up, which means more people are dying. If more people are dying, your population is not likely to grow, at least not at the same rate. So even if you had to make an indirect link in part D, it still doesn't answer your question. So C would be your answer. The charts show the population structure of a country from in 1960 and 2015, and they've given you, okay, these are not percentages, these are like absolute values in millions over here, and here you can figure out how many people were there for that particular age bracket. So let's say for 5 to 9 in 1960, the females that were there in the country were like 2 million, and kind of like the same. And if you want to look at males, you look at the left side. So what decreased between 1960 and 2015? So what decreased? The average age. Now, if you look at it, it's kind of difficult to calculate average age, to be honest. But if you had to make a fair guess, I mean, average age somewhere around here-ish, right? Because if you look at it, a lot of people are living are like 29 and 29 and less than 29, but not that many people are above that. The width here is very low, and since the width, as you can see, represents your people in millions, hence we can say the average age would be somewhere around here. And if you look here, I mean, I say the average age is somewhere in the middle, because while there are a lot of people who are at such low ages, now there are also a lot of people at higher ages compared to before, at least. So your average age, if anything, has increased, it hasn't decreased. And just intuitively, if you think about it, just forget the charts for a second. Do you really think from 1960 to 2015 our average age has decreased, or has our life expectancy increased? Have we started living for longer? Think of that intuitively as well. Okay, what has decreased between 1960 and 2015? The number of people below the age of 15. So to look at that, we'll have to look back to our graph again. Let me use red for this option. Age of 15. So below the age of 15 is kind of like this. And you can just see. So here you have round about approximately 2 million on both ends. Here you have a little less than 2 million. In fact, on both ends. Again, I'm talking about approximately. So in fact, but if you think about it, I'm not sure if we can make that judgment, because this is a little more than 2 million. This is a little less. This is approximately 2 million, and this is a little less than 2 million. But this, well, let me zoom in a bit. Even the maximum amount is not exactly 2 million. So yeah, I think we can say, in fact, that this is still, if you look at this area that it's deviated from 2 million is still a lot more than before. Yeah, so I think we can say that the number of people below 15 have decreased, because the bars are not as wide as they were before. So B can be our answer. Let's look at the other ones anyways. The total population above 60, well, obviously that has increased. Look at it like this. Population above 60. Look at the bars here. They're so small. Look at the bars here. They're much larger. Obviously, the population above 60 has increased. It has not decreased. And your total population, now again, the total population has also increased. Why is that? Just look at this. Here you had decent bars towards lower ages. Here you have more or less the same width of bars in lower ages and decent width of bars in upper ages. Means that you have a lot more people. You have pretty much the same amount of people at lower ages, like more or less, and you have a lot of people at higher ages as well. So overall, your population has increased rather than decreased, and which again intuitively makes sense. As the years go by, the world's population is just increasing, sadly. Okay, so B would be your answer. 26. At the start of the year, a developing country had a population. Oh God, how they're obsessed with population in this paper. Had a population of a million. Its birth rate was 16.0 per thousand per annum. So 16. So if you have 1,000 people, they're gonna produce 16 babies in a year, to put it simply. And its death rate was 8 per thousand, and from 1,000 people, 8 are gonna die. At the end of the year, the population was basically it has increased by 5,000. What could explain this change in the population? Now think of it like this: what is your net increase? Think okay, you have to calculate that first. If I look at it per thousand, the birth rate is 16. So 16 is an increase. I'm denoting it with a positive sign. And per thousand in a year, the death rate was 18. Was 8. Sorry, not 18. 8. And again, I'm denoting 8 with a negative sign because it shows decrease, right? Hence, your net increase was plus 8, right? Plus 8 per thousand. So if it's 8 for 1,000, then it's X for a million, which you just cross multiply, which gives you 8 into you got this, you got this, meaning you were supposed to have an increase of, let's say, 8,000. This is an increase. Again, I'm not talking about the absolute value. I'm talking about an increase of 8,000. But what does this show? This shows an increase of just 5,000. So your answer would be C. There was supposed to be an increase of 8,000. In reality, there was only an increase of 5,000. So where did the 3,000 go? The 3,000 emigrated. They went somewhere else. So that's the idea. What is the benefit of tariffs? What are tariffs? They're basically indirect taxes on imports. Tariffs, your duties that you often hear about on Japanese cars, for example, stuff of that sort, right? What is the benefit of tariffs? So what do tariffs do? Tariffs increase the price of imports. They make it more difficult for people to buy imports because they're more expensive, and hence people switch to your domestic switch to your domestic products. Now, in light of this, let's see the options. You don't have increased choice because you get choice with more imports. If imports are expensive, you're going to import less, you're going to have less choice. Increased government revenue, in fact, yes, because obviously there are still some people who still continue to import. If they continue to import, tariff is like an additional tax, right? It's a tax on import. So whoever still continues to import, they will pay that tax, and hence government tax revenue increases. More competition, no, because you would have more because international competition has gone down, because international firms can't successfully compete in the local industry because their products are being taxed like anything through tariffs. And there is hence going to be less trade because it's easier to trade when there aren't trade restrictions. Tariffs are a very cliched example of a trade barrier, of a protectionist policy, of a trade restriction, which discourages trade. So your answer would be B. Which name is given to the external value of a currency in terms of another currency? Is the exchange rate. Don't know really how to explain this. It's kind of just knowledge based. What is the external value of your currency? What is the value of the rupee internationally in terms of another currency? Let's say in terms of dollar. That is your exchange rate. That's all I can explain for this. It was reported in 2011 that the United States needed to achieve a lower current account deficit. So by a lower current account deficit, it means that deficit needs to be decreased, which basically means it has to move towards surplus. That's the idea. What would help this in the short run? Yeah, probably a protectionist policy. So there are a lot of components of your current account. I'm not going to go through all of them, but the first two components kind of make up what are known as your net exports, what you can also call your balance of trade. These are what your first two components make up, which is basically export revenue minus import expenditure. If you want to decrease your deficit, or if you want to move towards a surplus, you need to increase export revenue or decrease import expenditure, or do both. Now, protectionist policies help because protectionist policies, they increase the price of imports, and in the short run, where I hope I'm not I hope I'm not complicating things, but just follow me for a second. In the short run, the PED of imports is normally like less than 1. It's normally low. It's normally inelastic. For inelastic products, if you increase the price, you can increase the price by a large amount, but the quantity demanded decreases by less than the initial increase in price. And because of that, in fact, I stand corrected. I don't think this would be the answer, because you've increased price through a protectionist policy, but because products are normally inelastic in the short run, quantity demanded fell by a very small amount compared to the initial increase in import prices. If and total expenditure can be also be written as price into quantity. If price increased by a large amount, but quantity only decreased by a small amount, overall total expenditure increased by a very large amount. Total expenditure can be said to be import expenditure, which I can denote by M. So in fact, M has increased here, M hasn't decreased here. So this wouldn't help. It would help in the long run, where imports are elastic, but not in the short run. A strong exchange rate. So what does a strong exchange rate do? Let me write this here. A strong exchange rate means, which is basically appreciation. Think of it like that. Think of it like the rupee, instead of having to pay 15 rupees for a dollar, you only have to pay 50 rupees for a dollar, because the value of the rupee has increased. The rupee is stronger. Idea here is your import prices go down, your quantity demanded will increase by a very small amount because it's inelastic. Hence, your import expenditure will decrease. If import expenditure decreases, your net exports, balance of trade, this increases, which means your deficit is reduced or your current account moves towards a surplus. I hope that was clear. It's actually a very important concept about your current account, your balance of trade, and its link with elasticities of exports and imports. Hopefully, we were all aware of that. Anyhow, C and D are just like kind of like funny. So C is increased private sector spending. I don't see how that would have any effect on your current account. Investment in the US by multinational firms, and that the US needs to achieve a lower current account deficit. Okay, so even if multinationals do invest in the US, it would help its balance of payment, but it wouldn't help its current account, because investment, that would fall under a separate account. I don't remember for sure. I think it was either the financial account or the capital account. I'm not too sure. A lot of economists don't even differentiate between the capital and the financial account. They just take this as one huge account. So this would help your balance of payment, but it would not help your current account. So you need to be a little specific here. It would help another account. 30. The table shows the number of units, so like quantity, of foreign currency that the UK pound could buy in August 2012 and 2013. What can be concluded from the table about the change in currency values between 2012 and 2013? So let's just try to figure out a change, and then we'll just look which option corresponds with that. Now, the UK pound can buy 7.16 peso, and in 13 it can buy more. If the pound, if 1 pound could buy, let's say 7.16 whatever peso, but now later on the same pound can buy 8.35. Understand, the same pound can buy more. If the pound can buy more, then the pound has what the pound has appreciated, has grown stronger, because for the same amount, for the same £1, you can buy more. If the pound has appreciated simultaneously, obviously relative to the pound, the peso has depreciated. We can say that. Um, and I believe there is an option. So no, oh, that's not an option. Uh, in fact, the option A was the Argentine peso appreciated against the pound. It has depreciated, not appreciated. The Argentine peso depreciated against the euro. Difficult to tell. We have to look at other options. But yeah, we have to look at the other rows first. Okay, so the pound could buy 12.86 rand. It can now buy 14.96. Means the pound has grown stronger because it can now buy more. If the pound has grown stronger, then obviously the rand has grown weaker. You can make that, that's just a given. If one currency grows stronger relative to another, the other currency relative to that particular currency will grow weaker. So the African rand has depreciated relative to the pound. We can say that. Now let's look at the euro. The pound can buy 1.26. However, the pound can later buy less. So we can say the pound has depreciated with regards to the euro, because 1.26 it can buy before, now it can buy less. It's weaker. It's not worth as much. It does not have that much buying power, you can say. The euro, on the other hand, if the pound has depreciated, the euro has appreciated. Hence, you can cross out C, because the euro has obviously not depreciated against the US pound, against the UK pound. It has in fact appreciated. Now the issue here is, I believe this is the answer, but the issue here is that you have to now look at a few different exchange rates and make some comparisons. I could do this mathematically, although it's going to take a bit of time with that. So I'll just try to explain this logically. Let's say that this was the peso, this was the rand, this was the pound, and this was the euro. The pound has gone up, let's say, compared to these two. However, the euro has gone up compared to the pound. So if we had to think of hierarchy here, the euro is better than the pound in terms of value, let's say like that. But the pound is better than the rand and the peso in terms of value. Hence, we can say that the rand is not worth as much compared to the euro, and hence the rand is better. Let's say the peso isn't worth as much compared to the euro. Hence, we can say the peso has depreciated against the euro, which is what gives you answer B. Why can we say it has depreciated rather than it just is low valued? Because the euro appreciated here, right? The euro appreciated compared to the pound, and to that same pound, the peso depreciated. Think of it like this. This was the pound, this is euro, this is peso. Euro appreciated compared to the pound, peso depreciated compared to the pound. If we exclude pound, we can simply say peso depreciated compared to euro, which is what I've done here. Peso depreciated against the euro. D would obviously be wrong, because the South African rand has not appreciated against the euro. It also has depreciated against the euro by the same logic. So which gives you 30B. And let me quickly check these answers. All right, so slight issue. I apparently got 29 wrong, which happens at times. And here the issue is I just overcomplicate it. So that's the issue. When you do O levels in your A2 year, you tend to overcomplicate stuff. Okay, let me put it very simply, because CIA wants you to think simply. You know, if you still believe that CIA tests intellect or anything, I don't know what to say to you. Just test conformity. Okay, look at it like this. Lower current account, they want to lower current account deficit. They want to reduce the current account deficit. You've studied policies to correct a deficit or to reduce a deficit. You studied two. One was expenditure dampening, where you used to reduce import expenditure by simply by what do you call it? Implementing contractionary policies. That was it. Just policies to reduce AD. That was expenditure dampening. Then you studied expenditure switching, which made use of protectionist policies in order to switch expenditure, from imports to local products. That was the idea. Now, I kind of went on like tangent with PD and really complicated stuff because you have to look at things at that level later on. But for your O levels, you look at protectionist policies. You remember that this is a part of your expenditure switching policies. You'll be like, yeah, this helps you reduce your current account deficit. Yay! Don't think too much. But that was it. Sorry about that. It happens I do solve on spot, so I can also get stuff wrong at times. But that was it. Hopefully it helped. If you liked it, do spread it around. Subscribe for more. That's it from my end.